Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone, this is my lecture number 2, a continuation of the international environmental laws. Earlier I had talked about the history of international environmental law as to why the formal law started, that is, what happened prior to the starting of the formal international law, which was incidents, property uses, the case of trail smelter arbitration, the case of incidents which took place of environmental pollution, the human rights which accords the right to healthy environment as a right, as a community right of the people, which all went accumulated, and it paved the way for 1972 Stockholm Declaration. The advanced countries of the world at that point of time had realized that we must make a formal start. So this lecture deals with the formal start of international environmental law, starting with the Stockholm Declaration and the events thereafter, and which led to a soft law first being developed and then the hard law. I am Dr. Shabnam Mehlawat from University of Delhi, Faculty of Law, and I'm here to deliver and to give you information on international environmental law. So my topic starts with how the formal law started in 1972, when several countries for the first time gathered together at Stockholm to account for the activities which human acts had produced and how to curb them by way of certain principles which should be inculcated before drafting any new laws in the domestic laws of each nation. So the Stockholm Declaration brought with it several things. It brought about the concept of sustainable development, not as per se, but in the form of its various ingredients, which it inculcated in its 26 principles of the Declaration. The United Nations Environment Programme was formed to formally start this event, and it was responsible for organizing this event in Stockholm. So this led to the formal start of it is also known as the Magna Carta of all environmental laws. This was a soft law which started in 1972 and went on to be accepted and to be reiterated in the World Charter for Nature of 1982. The hard law started after 1982 with the Vienna Convention on Depletion of the Ozone Layer, when a specific problem which was faced by the world at this point of time, they came together to draft a convention which would be like a preamble to start work on the ozone depleting substances which were causing loss to the ozone layer. So before we move on to the hard law, let me reflect and let you know about the soft law, which started with the formal start of international environmental law. Here is a list of events which shaped these laws, the first being the Stockholm Declaration of 1972, the second being the World Charter for Nature 1982. After that went on to be the Vienna Convention on Depletion of the Ozone Layer 1985. Then it was the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste 1989. And then it was the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development 1992, which was held in Rio and also known as the Earth Summit. After this came the Aarhus Convention, which was a European convention, but it had global overtones, and it gave out procedural rights for environmental matters It started with this convention where each country voluntarily accepted the ingredients of this convention and implemented them in the domestic laws of their country. This was followed by the World Summit on Sustainable Development in the year 2002. And this year went on to be a historic trademark because it was 10 years after the original Rio Declaration that they reflected on their actions and also promoted work to be made for the development of the third world countries with their basic problems of water, energy, health, agriculture, and biodiversity. This was followed by, again, a Rio Declaration or the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development 2012. This was 20 years after the original Rio Declaration, and then finally came the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, again a hard law agreement where they wanted each country to work on their domestic laws for the protection of climate. So the Stockholm Declaration, I will enumerate each of these events in a more elaborate manner, where under the Stockholm Declaration 1972, it was an international development which started formally with this declaration, and it enunciated 26 principles which provided the guidelines for starting work on environmental protection. After this, protection of environment became a part of international policy and the law. It was conceptualized that environment and development are an integral part of development of any country's economy. A balance has to be maintained to achieve sustainable development. As many as 114 nations participated and have agreed on 26 principles and an action plan for protection of world environment. Now, the Stockholm Declaration of 1972. This was the formal start, 26 principle guidelines for environmental protection. Then this conference took place on 5th June 1972 and is known as the Magna Carta for all environmental issues. It spoke of environmental cooperation, a conflict between development and environment, human settlements, natural resources to be protected, and pollution not to be created for the further protection of environment. It was based on the concept of sustainable development, which was previously also coined in the Cocoyes Declaration. It gave out several important principles like the equity principle, which is the current resources should be protected and preserved not only for the current generation to make use of, but also for the future generations who are yet to come into this world, and they must inherit a world which is resourceful, which is protected, and which does not cause damage to their health and to the environment. So every person or even a future individual has the right to inherit healthy resources. This is a part of the collective rights of individuals as well as communities. So this conceptual framework, it spoke of international cooperation, a conflict between development and environment, human settlements, natural resources to be protected, and pollution not to be created. It also acknowledged the polluter pays principle, that is, the person who pollutes must be made not only for the harm which he has caused, but also rectifying the same at all relevant levels. A compensation to be coming in, as far as it is recoverable, it should be recovered and restored to its original position. Another principle which existed at this point of time was the assimilative capacity principle, which stated that science is certain and whatever science does is good. But this was changed to the precautionary principle in 1982 when they realized that the after effects of scientific activities may not be known immediately. So for the uncertainty of science and uncertainty of predictions, one should take precautions before a person starts new activities, and it should be firstly tested and tried at lower scales before it can be implemented on a large scale. This also has become a part of sustainable development. Besides these principles, there are several other principles which the Stockholm Declaration talked about. It talked about the protection of environment. It talked about management of natural resources. It talked of management of renewable resources. It talked of conservation of wildlife, management of non-renewable resources, the pollution controls to be maintained by licensing systems being given, prevention of pollution of the seas, economic and social development, underdevelopment and natural disasters to be prevented as far as possible, environmental policies to be framed by countries so that the industrial and the otherwise environmentally degrading activities should be channelized in a manner that they do not cause further degradation. It also talked of the stability of prices of the natural commodities. It talked of the vicious circle of poverty to be contained, environmental protection education to be imparted at all levels and all places, where public science may inform people how their activities may not be environmentally benign. There should be a rational management of resources, rational planning, human settlements and human populations should be protected. The setting of environmental pollution control agencies at all national levels as well as other levels. The use of science and technology should be for the benefits of mankind and not for adverse activities. Further scientific research should be carried out to enhance the progress made by science and to ensure that this scientific activity does not cause environmental harm as well as harm to mankind. The development of international law and cooperation in all these activities would be appreciated if every country followed this as a part of its policy or lawmaking and then implemented it in their domestic laws of their country. It would be a source of action where coordinated action would lead to environmental protection. There should be coordinated and dynamic roles, and there should be a ban on nuclear weapons. These principles have till date been applied, followed, and these are the ingredients which were later on described to be those of sustainable development, the basis of starting work of all environmental matters, whether it was internationally, whether it was nationally, or at all regional levels. So this Stockholm Declaration was a Magna Carta since it paved the way for starting activities, for protecting those activities from causing harm to the environment, from making laws within a country and finding ways to implement those laws so that the environmental degrading activities do not cause harm not only to the people but also not to the environment. This was followed by the World Charter for Nature 1982. It was divided into three parts. Firstly, they followed the same principles of the Stockholm Declaration on Human Environment. Then they talked about the functions of this functions which need to be carried out under this charter, and then a means of implementation. Now, elaborating upon each is, in the set of principles, they said nature should be respected and essential processes should not be impaired. Genetic viability on the earth should not be compromised, and population level of all life forms, wildlife, domestic as well as should be sufficient for their survival, and to this end necessary habitats should be safeguarded. All areas of the earth, both land, sea and the air, shall be subject to principles of conservation. Special protection should be given to unique areas. Representative samples of all different types of ecosystems and to the habitats of rare or endangered species. Ecosystems and organisms as well as land, marine and atmospheric resources that are utilized by man should be managed to achieve and maintain the optimum sustainable productivity, but not in a way which is to endanger the integrity of those ecosystems or species where they coexist. Nature should be secured against degradation caused by warfare or hostile activities of mankind. Under the functions, it stated that in the decision-making processes and in planning and implementation of social and economic development activities, conservation of nature and natural systems should be protected. Natural resources should not be wasted, but used with a restraint where living resources should not be utilized in excess of their natural capacity for regeneration. The productivity of soils shall be maintained to prevent erosions and all forms of degradation. Resources, including water, which are not consumed as they are used, should be reused and recycled. Non-renewable resources which are consumed should be exploited with restraint. Activities which might have an impact on the environment should be controlled, and the best available technologies that minimize significant risks to nature shall be used. Activities which are likely to cause irreversible harm should be avoided, and those posing risks should be preceded by exhaustive examination. In other words, the precautionary principle should be adopted. Agriculture, grazing, forestry, fisheries practices shall be adapted to the natural characteristics and not to any degrading forms. Areas degraded by human activity shall be rehabilitated for purposes in accordance with the natural potential and compatible with the well-being of affected populations. Discharge of pollutants into natural systems, special precautions shall be taken to prevent the discharge of radioactive or toxic substances. Under the means of implementation, the principles set forth in the present charter reflects in the law and practice of each state as well as at the international levels. Knowledge of nature should be broadly disseminated. All the elements should be disclosed to the public by appropriate means in time to permit effective consultation and participation. Funds, programs, and administrative structures necessary to achieve the objective of conservation of nature shall be provided. The status of natural processes, ecosystems, and species shall be closely monitored for threats or harm which may be caused to the environment. Military activities damaging to nature shall be avoided. In other words, states, and to the extent they are able, other public authorities, international organizations, individuals, groups, and corporations shall extend cooperation in conserving nature by establishing standards for products and manufacturing processes. They shall implement the applicable international legal provisions for conservation of nature and protection of environment, which ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause harm to the natural systems and safeguard them, and conserve nature in areas within or beyond their jurisdiction. So this World Charter for Nature was the place and the time till soft law existed and till soft law was implemented. To the detriment of the world and to the enactment of these principles, it was stated that the implementation should be made voluntarily, and nobody should be forced to apply these principles within the domestic territories. So it resulted in a soft law with no backing of hard law provisions for the forceful implementation of these principles up till 1982. It was only in 1985 that the world realized that the ozone layer had depleted, and it was in 1974 two scientists gave out this theory that it was these CFCs being used in the entire industry which were responsible for depletion of the ozone layer. It surprised the world, and they were stunned when the entire industry they saw would be affected if these CFCs were removed, because they were used in the daily commodities like your ACs, your refrigeration, your sprays, your aerosols, and likewise several other articles, everyday articles of daily use in human life. So they realized, firstly, there was a disbelief that they were just trying to remove developing countries, not to make use of them so that they do not develop. Slowly and steadily, they realized the problem was real, and it was actually created by the use of CFCs in these countries, where these CFCs, when released, at the lower levels, they are at the inert stage, but the moment they mix with the winds and move up into the air, they react with the ozone layer and are responsible for removal of the layer. So this hard law, which started with the Vienna Convention on Depletion of the Ozone Layer, was a formal start where several advanced countries came together and signed the convention. This convention was framed for the awareness of the potentially harmful impact on human health and environment through the modification of the ozone layer, recalling the pertinent provisions of the Declaration of United Nations Conference on Human Environment 1972, and in particular Principle 21, and also based on the maxim of sic utier tu elenum non ledus, that is, you may use anything within your territory provided it does not cause harm or injury to your neighbor. So it brought special provisions for the developing countries named as the Article 5 countries. It provided help in the form of finances and technology to switch over the environment friendly manner, and first phase out the production, then consumption, and then absolutely phase out these CFCs which were causing harm and damage to the environment. Now, this was based on the polluter pays principle, that since these countries firstly develop these products and they are the ones who are responsible for the problem, so they should be made to pay compensation for what they had created. Meanwhile, countries like India, China, and Brazil, who were in the process of development, did not agree immediately to these provisions for the same reason, that they thought it was their development which would stop if they do not make use of these CFCs for building products within their countries. The phase out of all countries was based on the precautionary principle for both the developed or the non-Article 5 countries and underdeveloped and the developing world. They meanwhile gathered parties and they came down to the Montreal Protocol on depletion of the ozone layer, which was drafted in 1987, which set out certain targets to be made for the firstly stopping of the production and then the consumption and slowly phasing out. So this 1987 Montreal Protocol, under the convention, it controls the production and consumption of chemicals, none of which occur naturally, the CFCs, the halogens, the fully halogenated chlorofluorocarbons, the hydrochlorofluorocarbons, methyl bromide, and other chemicals which were listed out under the Montreal Protocol on depletion of the ozone layer. The protocol originally required parties other than the developing countries to freeze consumption and production of CFCs by the 1986 levels, keeping that as the base year, to reduce them by 20% and then additional 30% by 1999, and to freeze consumption of halogens at 1986 levels. Now, this was regarded as one of the success stories in the international arena, since most of the countries came together, agreed on the provisions, and agreed to phase out these production consumption of these CFCs in a regulated manner. It was the developing countries which joined under the guise of that they would be receiving finances and technology to switch over to environment-friendly technologies. Slowly and steadily, they made the use of CFCs at a price so high that it was easier to utilize alternatives to these CFCs than to make use of them in the industry, because the production of the product then would become very expensive if the purchase of the basic requirements of these commodities were purchased at a very high levels. This was followed by the 1990 London Amendment, which provided for building up of a multilateral fund. So for the first time, monetary means were utilized, that how would the funds be circulated when they came from the developed world or the non-Article 5 countries. So they developed a multilateral fund which would receive these funds from these countries and then distribute them to the projects which are to be built within the developing as well as the underdeveloped world. During this time, the countries were divided as the North-South divide. They were then, with the disintegration of the USSR, the categories became those which were the developed countries, countries with economies in transition, the developing countries, and then the underdeveloped countries. It was in 1997 that the Montreal Amendment obligated countries to establish and implement a licensing system for the import and export of new, used, recycled, and reclaimed controlled substances, and to control trade in the of the banned substances by parties not in compliance with the protocol. It was in 1999 that amendment that provided for the basic domestic needs exception for certain controlled chemicals and made bromochloromethane to the list of controlled substances. This convention and the protocols which came later were helped out by agencies like United Nations Environment Program, the United Nations Development Program, United Nations Industrial Development Organization. Then it went on to the World Bank, and now what exists is the Global Environment Facility for carrying out the economic aspect of the convention to completely phase out the use of CFCs from daily lives of these, whether it is the developed world or whether it is the developing or the underdeveloped world. Meanwhile, there was also a Brundtland report which was given out, but this report only reflected on the principles. And then what hard law which came was after Vienna Convention was, that is, strict controls, mandatory enforcement of those persons who are parties or signatories to these conventions. They have to follow the rules or they will not be included in all important matters in relation to these conventions. It was after 1985 of the Vienna Convention that in 1989 the Basel Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste came in. The countries realized that the debris or the end product or the depreciated product or the residue of these industries was being channelized by the advanced countries or the industrialists in a way that he is not made liable for the activities or the harm which he is causing. This led to that industrial and the toxic waste being traveling to countries like Africa, countries like India, and also being dumped into the ocean, where ships, rudderless ships, would be sent into the sea, where they would sink, and in the no man's land, nobody was there to question them. It was started affecting the terrestrial life in a very adverse manner, besides damage being caused on the land as well as the air pollution. So this convention was framed. This convention is known as Convention on Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste, that all hazardous activities should be channelized in a way that licenses should be granted, and before industrialist starts a new activity, he should be showing how he will be disposing of his waste in a more organized and a responsible manner, for which licensing systems are made mandatory, and certain other rules and regulations came into force, like eco-labeling or labeling of products which would mention what harmful substances they would contain. Now, this convention should be read with the Rotterdam Convention on the Prior Informed Consent Procedure for Certain Hazardous Chemicals and Pesticides in International Trade 1998, and the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants 2001. The international agencies working along with these three conventions are the United Nations Environment Program, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and the World Health Organization. The three conventions share the common objective of protecting human health and environment from hazardous chemicals and waste falling within their respective scopes. The overreaching objective of the Basel Convention is to protect human health and the environment against adverse effects of hazardous waste. The objective of the Rotterdam Convention is to promote sound use and shared responsibility in the international trade of certain hazardous chemicals in order to protect human health and environment. The objective of the Stockholm Convention is to protect this from persistent organic pollutants. In 2010 in Bali, a meeting of the parties took place where the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Conventions took place, seeking a synchronization of the three in a coordinated manner as a way forward to deal with the problem of hazardous chemicals and the waste occurring thereby. The Conference of Parties joined hands to tackle hazardous waste and to deal with challenges posed by dealing with sound management of hazardous substances at different stages of the life cycles. These three conventions together bring about hazardous chemicals they bring about that hazardous chemicals could be managed within a life cycle approach, thereby guaranteeing that chemicals and pesticides are managed in the most environmentally sound manner. So these three conventions basically protect human health and environment from toxic and environmental waste and hazardous chemicals, which result in damage to the environment and to the health of the people. So this was again a very important development in the international arena with respect to the protection of environment. All these conventions work simultaneously in their own fields, and where there is overlapping, they meet an agreement to come together so that the overlapping for the protection of environment helps in achieving its conservation and preservation. After this, we move on to the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, or the Earth Summit, or the Rio Declaration of 1992. Now, this declaration was a landmark and again a historic event because for the first time, besides the government participating, there was a participation of civil society, of NGOs, and all persons who were stakeholders in the protection of environment and earlier did not have a say in either the framing of the principles or the policies or the laws within the domestic frameworks of their country or at an international level. So what this convention went on to do was, it firstly drafted the principles, and then it went on to draft a blueprint plan for action work for protection of human health and environment. It also talked about protection of forests worldwide, how to conserve, protect, and not removal of and to protect the forest covers which were responsible for a healthy environment and which at the current stage are at a very sorry state. It also drafted two hard law provisions, which was the United Nations Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is a very important convention in relation to protection of biological diversity, their habitats, and the coexistence of these habitats with each other. So this conference was a landmark achievement and a meeting because it not only brought the nations together, but it also brought civil societies and public together in the form of stakeholders, in the form of those who are not heard before, in the form of ethnic and minority communities who had not earlier participated and did not have a say. So they made provision for all persons who would be affected by these activities to have a say and to have their rights in case they are violated to be implemented. So United Nations, this conference marked a landmark journey in the field of development of international environmental law because it was initially started by the Stockholm Declaration only in the form of principles, but carried forward here in the form of action work in the sense of climate change and protection of biodiversity. Along with principles, so it had both hard law as well as soft law for the purposes of implementation. It said, we accept and acknowledge the principles which were given out by the Stockholm Declaration, but it also framed and gave out an additional principle of common but differentiated responsibility, which they applied in the Convention on Climate Change, which stated that each one has a duty to protect the environment, but the responsibility owned by each nation state is different. So the responsibility comes in different forms, but the endeavor to save the environment is a common objective of all individuals, all nation states, or anybody who is affected by these activities at any rational level. So now moving on to the Rio Declaration. This took place in Rio de Janeiro from June 3rd to June 14, 1992, where more than 130 countries attended the conference. This promoted economic development to reduce poverty, to preserve and protect the Earth's ecological systems. It led to 5 major agreements on global environmental issues which were signed. 2 of these were the Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Convention on Biological Diversity, were formal treaties whose provisions are binding on the parties. The other 3 agreements are non-binding statements on relationship between sustainable environmental practices and the pursuit of social and socio-economic development. It reiterated 27 principles based on the Stockholm Declaration, Agenda 21, which was a blueprint plan for action work, forest principles for sustainable management of the forests worldwide, 2 hard law conventions which were even followed even as of today, because the impacts of climate change and the impact of changes in biological diversity are more than felt ever even as of today. They had started previously, where they were acknowledged by the Rio Declaration, put into form to be regulated by these conventions, and the progress which has been witnessed by this over a period of time is considered to be too late for them to be decided whether they should be implemented or not. So they should be mandatorily enforced, and in a manner which is regulated, and in a manner which protects and preserves our environment, not only for our current generation but also for our future generations. The principle of equity which has been given asks for reduction of gap not only in the current generation, that is the developed world and the underdeveloped world, but also between the current generation and our future generations. So this convention, when mentioned, is as I said, it's an important framework. It builds on whether how now this Convention on Climate Change, it established an international treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system by stabilizing the greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. It has been signed by 154 states under the UNCED. It established a secretariat headquartered in Bonn and entered into force on 21st March 1994. This treaty called for ongoing scientific research and regular meetings, negotiations and future policy agreements designed to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, to ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. The Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1997, was a major fallout under the convention, and it is for this reason that, in contrast to the Vienna Convention on Depletion of Ozone Layer, this is said to be not such a success story, because in 1997 they asked the advanced countries to reduce greenhouse gases by 5.2% by 1990 levels. This was one of the major reasons for fallout under the Kyoto Protocol. This has seen as a meeting of the parties under COP, various conference of party meetings every year taking place under this convention. But we cannot say each convention or each COP meeting was a success story until the Paris Agreement occurred in the year 2015. So this process remained hindered. There were several important meetings which have taken place under this convention. They had developed several categories of parties, where there were advanced countries, where there were countries who would not have financial liabilities, then the developing countries and the underdeveloped countries. According to their needs, they would be given finances and technology to switch over to environment friendly technologies so that the climate does not get impacted in an adverse manner. The developed countries were mainly responsible for the finances and for providing technologies to the underdeveloped and to the developing countries so that they make use of such systems and such technologies that they also do not cause equal harm to the environment. The the commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol was from the year 2008 to 2012. The protocol was amended in 2012 to encompass the second one period of 2013 to 2020 in the Doha Amendment. In addition to the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC also saw a Bali Action Plan, the Copenhagen Accord, and the Cancun Agreements and the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action. The conferences are held under the framework of the UNFCCC. They serve as a formal meeting of the parties to assess progress in dealing with climate change till the mid-1990s to the Kyoto Protocol to establish legal binding obligations for developing countries as well as developed countries to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. From the year 2005 to 2020, a meeting of the parties under Kyoto Protocol also takes place, and it was the first meeting was held in 1995 in Berlin. It was the third meeting which was held in Kyoto, which was a fallout, as I stated, under this convention. Now, after this convention, moving on to the Aarhus Convention. After the UNFCCC also was the Convention on Biological Diversity, which I'll be holding in my subsequent lectures. So I would not elaborate further here on the Convention on Biological Diversity. I would be moving on to the Aarhus Convention of 1998. Now this was a European convention. It started with United Nations European Convention, Economic Convention of it started with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and it gave out certain broad framework for environmental rights to be established. This convention was known as Convention on Access to Information, Public Participation in Decision Making, Access to Justice in Environmental Matters, and it was adopted on 25th June 1998 in the Danish city of Aarhus at the 4th Ministerial Conference as part of the Environment for Europe process. It entered into force on 30th October 2001. This convention established a number of rights of public individuals and their associations with regard to the environment. It is a European convention with global overtones. Why? Because this convention was voluntarily accepted by most countries of the world, whether they were developing, whether they are developed, or whether they are underdeveloped. Because this convention finally, in a very fine manner, brings out procedural rights for all environmental matters. It has also established, along with these ingredients, a protocol on pollutant release and transfer registers to be maintained. It protects every person's right to live in an environment adequate to his or her health and well-being. It links environmental rights to human rights. It acknowledges that we owe an obligation to our future generations. In other words, the equity principle. It also promotes the polluter pays principle, that the person who is causing wrong should be made to pay. It establishes that sustainable development can be achieved only through the involvement of all stakeholders. It links government accountability and brings environmental protection in that form. It focuses on the interactions between the public and the public authorities in a democratic context. And it also talks about disputes being resolved in a peaceful manner by negotiation or by arbitration. The subject of the convention goes to the heart of the relationship between the people and their governments. The convention is not only an environmental agreement which talks about procedural rights of environmental matters, but it is also a convention about government accountability, transparency, and responsiveness. So, this convention was again very important since it went on to say that the people should be allowed to participate, they should be allowed to allowed to make informed decisions, they should be asked where how to get a remedy in case their environmental rights are violated, and establishing the liability of the government to say or to show why it should not be made liable for bringing or providing licenses to people who are causing environmental damaging acts. So, this also promotes that all information should be brought online where people can go to that website, take the information, and make informed decisions whether their personal rights are affected or not. For the procedural aspect, each country already has a judicial system whereby these rights may be implemented. This was followed by the United Nations Summit on Sustainable Development, the year 2002. This is referred to as the World Summit on Sustainable Development, which took place in Johannesburg, South Africa from 26 August to 4th September 2002. It took place in 10 years after the first Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. So therefore, it is also nicknamed as Rio Plus 10. Instead of new agreements between the governments, the Earth Summit was organized mostly around 300 partnership initiatives known as Type 2, as opposed to Type 1 partnerships, which are the more classic outcome of international treaties. These are to be the key means to achieve the Millennium Development Goals, which are kept in a database for partnerships for sustainable development. This was based on the concept of sustainable development. It recognizes poverty eradication, changing consumption and production patterns, and protecting and managing the natural resource base for economic and social development. It states that they are overarching objectives of and essential requirements of sustainable development. The deep fault line that divides human society between the rich and the poor, and the ever increasing gap between the developed and the developing worlds, poses a major threat to global prosperity, security, and stability. It focuses on losses in biodiversity, adverse effects in climate change, natural disasters becoming more frequent, air, water, and marine pollution, globalization posing new threats to human health and the natural environment. It focuses mainly on Africa and the small island developing states and the underdeveloped countries, and the aspect of poverty eradication by reducing the gap between the rich and the poor. It focuses on water, energy, health issues, agriculture, and biodiversity of these countries. The summit brought together tens of thousands of participants, including heads of the state and the government, national delegates, and leaders from NGOs, businesses, and other major groups, to focus the world's attention and direct action towards meeting difficult challenges, including improving people's lives and conserving our natural resources in a world that is growing in population with ever increasing demands for food, water, shelter, sanitation, energy, health services, and economic security. The major outcomes of WSSD include a negotiated plan of implementation, a political declaration, and a number of implementation partnerships and initiatives. New targets and agreements were negotiated in a number of important areas, for example, sanitation. Previous agreements, such as those relating to the achievement of Millennium Development Goals, were also reaffirmed, making the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation a somewhat eclectic mix of new and past agreements and affirmations with important implications for health. This agreement also called for a strengthened commission to play a larger role in promoting implementation, included by facilitating partnership initiatives and sharing of best practices. So, this was said to be again a partial success story, if not a complete story. After this, the events under the various conventions took place, that is, the meetings, the conferences, the action plans, and the protocols, where some of them were implemented, the others could not be done so, and some were partially implemented and partially remain unimplemented. This was the situation of all the events which went on from the year 2000 to 2012. In 2012 again, which is 20 years after Rio, that they went on to have a United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, again at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, from 20th to 22nd June 2012, which resulted in a focused political outcome document containing clear and practical measures for implementing sustainable development. It renewed political commitment by reaffirming the Rio principles and the past action plans, advancing integration, implementation, and coherence, assessing the progress to date and the remaining gaps in the implementation of the outcomes of the major summits on sustainable development, and addressing new and emerging challenges. It engaged major groups and other stakeholders. Sustainable development, it stated, required a meaningful involvement and an active participation of regional, national, and subnational groups, legislatures, and judiciaries, and all other major groups in its making. This was 20 years after the original declaration, as I stated previously. It talked of strengthening institutional framework for sustainable development. In Rio, member states decided to launch a process to develop a set of sustainable development goals, which would build upon the MDGs or the Millennium Development Goals and converge with the post-2015 development agenda. The conference also adopted groundbreaking guidelines on green economy policies. The government also decided to establish an intergovernmental process under the General Assembly to prepare options on a strategy for sustainable development financing. The means of implementation deliberated upon through financing, technology, capacity building, trade, and registry of commitments. So, this was 20 years assessment after the original Rio Declaration, the period from 1992 to the period till 2002, which was assessed by the Johannesburg Summit or the United Nations Declaration on Sustainable Development in the year 2002 of the held in Johannesburg, also called Johannesburg Summit, till 2012, which was 20 years after Rio, which saw major development work for going forward or withdrawal of countries for, according to the documents and the decisions which each head of the state took in relation to environmental activities. So these activities led on to one major agreement, had a major fallout, which was the Climate Change Convention. The Climate Change Convention up till the year 2012 did not see any major progress. It was certain countries which on their own were implementing the policies and the processes, and in other ways some were half-heartedly implementing and the others did not acknowledge that as a part of their nation building policy, law, or implementation purposes. So then it went on to talk about the Paris Agreement on Climate Change in 2015. The Paris Agreement came as a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted by 196 countries at COP21 in Paris on 12th December 2015 and entered into force on 4th November 2016. The 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or the COP26, is a crucial moment for efforts to address the climate crisis. Its goal was to limit global warming to below 2, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to the pre-industrial levels. To achieve this long-term temperature goal, countries aim to reach global peaking of greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible to achieve a climate neutral world by the mid-century. The Paris Agreement is landmark in the multilateral climate change process because for the first time a binding agreement brings the nations together for a common cause to undertake ambitious efforts to combat climate change and adapt to its effects. Implementation of the Paris Agreement requires economic and social transformation based on the best available science. This agreement works on a 5-year cycle of increasingly ambitious climate action carried out by the countries. By 2020, the countries were supposed to submit their plans for climate action known as the nationally determined contributions. In their nationally determined contributions, countries communicated actions they will take to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. So this Paris Agreement framed at that time asked for reorganization of the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. It stated that now the developing world and countries like India, China and Brazil are now equally responsible for the pollution, more pollution which has been created. So they also should take responsibility for the harm which has been caused. It sought for reorganization of the principle. It sought for specific action plan to be taken up till the year 2020. And after that, we saw what happened and what came by way of the COVID, which slowed down the earth and its activities. And it was as if the natural resources were given time to replenish or to re-establish themselves what had already been replenished by human activities and the harm and the degradation which has been caused. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Hello, I am Shikha Dikshit. I teach psychology and I am with the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Kanpur. Today I am going to talk about what is health psychology. In the recent past, health psychology has emerged as one of the important areas in psychology. It is a field of study where psychological theories and concepts are applied to understand issues regarding health and illness. The two major themes which health psychologists are interested in studying are the themes of illness experience and behaviors associated with that experience. Contemporary health psychology adopts various and diverse kind of perspectives to understand health and illness issues. These perspectives include the behavioral perspective, the societal perspective and the cultural perspective. If we try to enumerate the kind of topics that health psychologists study, the range is very wide. To name a few of the topics, health psychologists study cognitions related to illness, that is health and illness related cognitions, social cognitive aspects of health and illness, cognitive adaptation, chronic illness and adaptation to chronic illness, disability, stress and management of stress. Health psychologists also study topics such as health related quality of life, social support and various kinds of coping mechanisms that people adopt to deal with illness experience. In addition to this kind of experience, health psychologists also study healthcare systems, health promotion and treatment related aspects, including doctor-patient relationships. So, as we see, the range of topics is very large. Health psychologists also use qualitative methods, and they study topics such as narratives of illness experience as well as social representations of health and illness.